PreventConnect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or CalCASA. This is your PreventConnect team that is on here today. So I'm Ashley. Tori is going to be helping with your tech issues and all of the great links that we have to share with you. Our objective for this session is really to look at community mobilizing and organizing and to engage in a discussion about how we can incorporate community mobilizing and organizing into the work that you're doing on your own to prevent child sexual abuse in your community. And so one thing that I think is really important to say when we talk about community organizing and mobilizing in terms of sexual violence prevention is that we're really looking at how do we develop prevention activities within communities that really uses the strengths of the community, so the language, the resources, the values of the community to find solutions and make change. And so allowing communities to use their strengths to find solutions and make the change that they want to see that's necessary. And so I'm really excited to be able to hear what's happening in some selected communities out of the Just Beginnings Collaborative. And so these are the guests that you'll be hearing from today. I'm going to introduce you to them all individually, but we'll be hearing from Ed from Just Beginnings Collaborative, Ignacio from the HEAL Project, Strong Oak from Visioning Fair Circle Intertribal Coalition, and Sugat from Líderes Campesinas. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce you all to Ed Brown. Ed is the interim program coordinator at Just Beginnings Collaborative. Ed was on our very first session and was not able to join us last session, but and we missed you, Ed. But Ed is back for this session. And so, Ed, I'd love to pass the podium, so to speak, over to you, and just if you would tell us a little bit about the work that you do, and then Just Beginnings Collaborative. I think that would be really useful for our audience.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Hi, everyone. My name is Ed Brown. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm the interim program coordinator for Just Beginnings Collaborative. I actually entered into the field of organizing into the child sexual abuse world. As a Black, trans, masculine, non-binary survivor of child sexual abuse, it felt really important to me to really think about CSA as an intersection space of organizing. And so I began my organizing home is actually now one of the fellows for Just Beginnings Collaborative, which is the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collaborative that is located in Oakland. And that home was really important to me because it really introduced me to the idea of something that I felt in my body but didn't know how to articulate politically, which was the best solutions for child sexual abuse did not lie in the hands of the police as a way to prevent child sexual abuse or even to respond, right? So the Transformative Justice Collaborative is really interested in exploring what are community-based, non-police intervention-based responses to child sexual abuse and how we could prepare our communities, our families, the people in our lives, in our most intimate spaces to be ready to respond to child sexual abuse. And so that work has always grounded me in this work and carried with me, even though I'm not directly organizing with the BATJC, coming back as the interim program coordinator for the last year with Just Beginnings has really been another place of support, deeper learning, because we support 18 grantees. It's an opportunity for us to learn very deeply from multiple strategies being used across the sector. So a little bit more about the Just Beginnings Collaborative. It was started with 3 core strategic goals. It was to strengthen the capacity of leaders and organizations working to end child sexual abuse. Because what we knew was people were doing this work, sometimes siloed within other, in other organizing communities like sexual assault communities, really didn't have all of the capacity that they needed to be able to do this work at the full strength of their vision and ideas. And so that was the first place we thought about, is like, actually the people who are doing this work actually just need to be nourished, need to be strengthened, need to be connected to one another. Next was to create a community of funders committed to the long-term sustainability of this work, and that has been our design challenge over the past 4 years, is to really think about what does it take for other funders to come on board, to want to say yes to funding child sexual abuse specifically, even in the height of the Me Too movement, even in the height of Surviving R. Kelly, which a lot of this started based, you know, the Survivor and R. Kelly series really brought out like, oh, these were children, right? Even in the height of all of those things, there seems to still be a funder's disconnect between funding things that support adult sexual assault and funding things that support child sexual abuse. So it is our continued challenge to be thinking about how to bridge that gap and how to support people with coming in as funders, understanding the intergenerational need for this work. And then finally, it was to develop social change campaigns specific to the issue. And really this level of work doesn't necessarily live inside of Just Beginnings. It lives inside of our collaborative partners. So like many of the collaborative partners that you're going to hear from today, you're going to be able to have an up-close personal look about their strategy for community mobilization around child sexual abuse, which in Just Beginnings we hold and held for inviting folks to be organizations or fellows a part of the grantee process as an intersectional process. We knew that child sexual abuse essentially was deeply cultural, right? And cultural in many ways. It could be regionally cultural, it could be linguistically cultural, it could be ethnically cultural or racially cultural. And so we knew that the best strategies around campaigns or how to get this conversation started in more communities was going to be at the level of those different cultures. Great. What I would say about the Just Beginnings Collaborative last is that we are in our sunset year, so we actually very much have been in an innovative space around this work, and so we are sunsetting this year to then open up a space of inquiry and curiosity and see what have we learned from these 18 organizations to think about what is next needed to continue with these strategic goals. And I think at the end you will get my contact information if you have any questions about JBC individually. Please feel free to contact me. All right, Ashley, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Eb. Appreciate you for sharing about your work, and then also, you know, the work through Just Beginnings Collaborative. And so hopefully if folks on the call we're not familiar with Just Beginnings Collaborative, you've gotten a bit of a picture now. And if you have any questions for Ed, please, this is a great time to pop them in the text chat, and we will make sure that we either get to them today or we will make sure that they get back to Ed so that he can answer those for you. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our first fellow from the Just Beginnings Collaborative. And so I'm going to read you Ignacio's bio. So Ignacio Hutia Shaiti Rivera, a.k.a. Poppy Cox, who prefers the gender neutral pronoun they, is an activist, writer, educator, sexual healer, filmmaker, performance artist, and mother. Ignacio has over 20 years of experience on multiple fronts, including economic justice, anti-racist and anti-violence work, as well as mujerista, LGBTQI, and sex-positive movements. Ignacio is the founder and director of the HEAL Project, which works towards a cultural shift on how we communicate with our children and young people about sex as child sexual abuse prevention tool. Ignacio is the creator and co-host of Pure Love Talks, a YouTube talk show with their adult daughter, Amanda. They storytell and attempt to go beyond theory to practice on how one navigates the broad topic of sex and sexuality within the institution of the broadest definition of family. Ignacio is also the founder of Renewed Sexuality, coaching a sexual healing practice that centers LGBTQI people of color survivors. Renewed works with those who desire to renew or reconnect to sex, those who are ready to have new sexual explorations, which includes the act of self-determined sex and sexuality. Ignacio's work is influenced by their lived experience of homelessness, poverty, and sexual trauma. Ignacio's work is also driven by the strengths of identifying as transgender. Yamoka, who, Ignacio, please correct me, two-spirit, black, Taino, sober, polyamorous, and queer. There we go. So Ignacio, and please correct any of my language. I apologize for that.
No, that was
really
great.
Okay. But I would love for you, I mean, your bio, first of all, I have so many questions. I want to know everything. But I'm going to pass over the podium to you, and I would just love if you would walk us through how you are incorporating sexual education in your work to end child sexual abuse and what that looks like.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, as Ashley said, I'm Ignacio Hutia Shaiti Rivera, and I am the founder of the HEAL Project. And the HEAL Project stands for Hidden Encounters, Altered Lives. And it's a project that aims to prevent and end CSA, making visible the hidden tools used to guilt, shame, coerce, and inflict violence onto children. As a part of the HEAL Project, I have Pure Love, which you mentioned, that I do with my daughter on YouTube, and it could be seen on our website as well. And Pure Love came out of the need for people to have like tangible things that they wanted to know. How do I do this? How do I talk to my children about these topics? So we started Pure Love Talks, and I've used my relationship with my daughter as the platform for these conversations on Pure Love. Also, Renewed Sexuality Coaching also came out as working on the two spectrums. I just say working on either end of one spectrum. One is preventative work for children, working with families, and on the other end, it's healing sexuality for adult survivors of sexual violence and child sexual abuse. This past year, I did the Guatu tour, and Guatu is a Taino name for fire. And I did this tour. It was 14 cities in 10 weeks, and I did over 35 programs connecting with fellows and organizations across the country doing work with families and survivors to talk about this particular topic. This year, I hope, at the end of this year, I hope to have completed the toolkit, which is a culmination of conversations with lots of people, inquiries from Pure Love Talks, and also the Caregiver Survey that I developed. So the Caregiver Survey, and caregiver I define as anyone who is a parent, an uncle, a grandparent, anyone who has any kind of connection with a young person, which is mostly all of us, to take this survey so that it can help inform the toolkit to help families and individuals really tackle this very scary topic of sex and sexuality with children. And so the HEAL Project works towards culturally shifting how we communicate with children and young people about sexuality as a CSA prevention tool. And the project's platform is that holistic sexuality information is a major tool in preventing, interrupting, and healing from child sexual abuse. One of the questions, go ahead. Should I pause here?
No, that's totally fine. I think we'd love, so as Ignacio is walking us through this work, we'd also love to get a sense of what you all are doing. And so we'd love to hear from you about your insights around, like, what do you think holistic sexuality has to do with child sexual abuse prevention? Why would providing holistic sexuality information have a place in working to prevent child sexual abuse? So we'd love to get your insights on that. And Ignacio, I think what we'll do is we'll let people kind of ruminate on that answer, and we'll come back and see what's come up in the text chat. So why don't you go ahead?
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so some of the prevention tools that we've often heard of when trying to work against CSA is, we tell people, learn the facts about CSA, minimize the opportunities, talk about it with your children, recognize the signs, and react responsibly. And some of these things sound pretty easy, but they're kind of difficult. So learning the facts, and that in and of itself is really difficult for people because CSA is something people really don't want to talk about, and usually we're confronted with it when it's happened, right? Minimize the opportunities can be a really tricky thing because some of those things are, know who's taking care of your children, do research on after-school programs. And some of us, depending on our economic status or where we live or the resources we have, really that becomes a problem, right? So all of the ways in which we think we can minimize it becomes difficult. Talking about it, yet another thing. If we're learning the facts, we're scared to learn the facts, talking about it can be really tricky, and the way we talk about it with children can be really harmful sometimes. Recognizing the signs, sometimes those signs lead us somewhere else. If a child is being over-sexual or starting trouble in school or fighting, sometimes we don't see the CSA in that. We see other things, and it takes a while to recognize those signs and react responsibly. What does that mean? How do we react responsibly? Does that involve police? Does that involve telling other family members? Like, we don't know what that is. So I think we need a little more. Other prevention methods or efforts have been identifying and tracking sex offenders, chemical castration, encouraging children to speak up about the abuse, and recognizing and responding to inappropriate behavior. And identifying and tracking sex offenders, I mean, we could have a full day talk on the failures of the sex offender registry. Chemical castration really just kind of speaks to, kind of focusing on the penis as the only way that someone can be sexually assaulted, and encouraging children to speak up. And that's really difficult for children when you think about adults who have a hard time speaking up about sexual assault, especially when they have no language around it. Can be difficult as well. So these are prevention methods, but there are some other things that we could be doing. And so what is missing here? And so we talk a lot about power, especially when we talk about sexual assault. We talk about that this has nothing to do with sex, but power over. And I tend to agree that, yes, this has to do with power, but it doesn't end there. We need to be expanding our ideas of power when we think about that. So we want to think about power of the harm doer. We also want to think about power of the parent, adult, or caregiver, and power of the child, young person, or lack thereof. All right. So as parents, we have power over our children and the information that we give them. And children are seen as the property of parents. So we need to be really thinking about power in a broader context. And then, of course, sex is completely eliminated from the conversation of sexual violence, sexual assault, and child sexual abuse, which is interesting because sex is, the word sex is in all of those things. So there are limited sex talks that we have with children, and many parents and adults have little skill or have fear, or parents are survivors themselves, so don't even know how to broach the situation. All right. So why is talking about sex important for prevention? All right. Sex is often, like I said, eliminated from the conversation, but it's the thing that we don't want to teach kids about, what we shame people about, what we struggle to understand as survivors, and sex is literally the common denominator here. So through my work, I wanted to take that common denominator and work with that. So holistic sexuality, this is a definition that I kind of came up with. So holistic sexuality is the belief that the physical act of sex is but one part of human sexuality. The ever-expanding whole of sexuality is interactive. Our ideas, experiences, identities, acts, and feelings can stand, shift, and flow. Sexual development, sexual health, reproductive health, interpersonal relationships, affection, understanding of power, intimacy, body image, abstinence, gender identity, understanding emotions, accountability, sexual orientation, communication, and understanding of sexual history, and a broader idea of relationship configurations are but some parts of holistic sexuality. So if we see this definition, we see that talking about sex or trying to tackle the sex talks really goes beyond the getting naked and falling in love and maybe having children, right? It is a very, very limited, and I think that limited view really doesn't allow for us to think about how sex has a huge impact, or sexuality has a huge impact on our everyday lives. So holistic sexuality information is what we give to our children to prepare them for their journeys. It's a lifelong ideological, internal, interpersonal, and institutional process of acquiring information and forming attitudes, beliefs, and values. If we think about sex in this broader context, then we're actually going to be talking to our children about how they communicate, how they hear information or take in information. It's about consent beyond sexual consent. It just goes into so much more than we have made it into. So I ask people, like, what do you think? If you're a caregiver, what triggered the first talk? What topics did you avoid? If you haven't talked about it, why? And for youth, what do you want to talk about and learn? I often start there. You know, sometimes youth have a lot of things that they want to ask questions about, but if the avenue of that's not open for them, it's really difficult. And for children, can children name their body part properly, right, with the correct words and know what they are without shame or feeling uncomfortable? So I have this intentional human sexuality model, and I'm just going to show you a little snippet of the topics that I tend to cover when talking about holistic sexuality. And it's encouraged by historically how one learns about sex, because we learn about sex from many, many different ways, and we don't get the same information all the time. So we might learn it from our parents, we might learn it from school, from church, from friends, from pornography, from books, from erotica. So we're getting different information, right? It's also encouraged by the backlash associated with sexual taboos, right? We have a lot of taboos around sex and sexuality, so it really makes us want to not share this information or share our curiosity about it. And the ideology that there are those entitled and not entitled to have sex or be sexual or have intimacy. And I'm thinking here about people who are LGBTQI, people of color, fat people, people who are older. So there are a lot of rigid ideas about who has sex or what it means as a person if you have this particular sex. Right? So there's a lot of heaviness around sex. And so these are some of the topics. And I usually love to start with curiosity. So we have curiosity, desire, identity, sex, spiritual intimacy or sex, self-pleasure, BDSM or kink, role play, and fantasy. These are all things that can exist within themselves, and they can also connect with one another. And if we have a broader understanding of how we navigate through our feelings, desires, our sex, it won't be so scary, and it should be really celebrated and talked about very openly and honestly, because then it wouldn't be used as a tool to harm. And this model celebrates open communication, relationship building. It's a teaching model for both adults and children. You do not have to know everything about any of these things that I mentioned. You just have to be able to be learning yourself and also be willing I think somebody needs to take mute.
Yeah, we're getting some feedback, so one of our presenters may need to mute themselves.
Okay, that sounds great now. Okay, you do not need to know all of the answers, and what the beauty of this model is that you can be learning along with your child. You can learn yourself and then go teach them, and it really incorporates power and oppression, right? I often say that I could not have taught my daughter about sex without talking about fat phobia, about what it means to be a black woman. I could not talk to her about it without talking about oppression of LGBTQI folks, right? So that it was very intersectional, right? So we need to be thinking about sex in an intersectional lens, and it discourages secrecy. Corporate sexual orientation, including asexuality, and it discusses trans, cis, intersex identities, and it goes beyond monogamy. And like I always say, it is a lifelong journey from birth to crossing over. To me, these conversations never, ever end. You continue to talk about them. All right. So I like to think of this process as if you were a mama bird, right? When you're a mama bird, you go out and you get the worm, you get the cricket, you chew it up, and you make it ready and available for your children to take in and to get nourished so that one day they can fly, you know, from the nest, right? It is our job to get this information for our young people, and that is where power comes in. If we know that this information, I am a strong believer that sex education saves lives. If we know that this saves lives, why are we eliminating this vital conversations or conversations with our children, right? This process is about, you know, holistic sexuality information as a life skill. Just like any other life skill, we teach our children about hygiene, about how we brush our teeth, how to cross the street, like all of the things that help our children. And that children have more power through knowledge, navigating power of parents and guardians, and eliminating the power of secrecy used by harm doers, and so, so much more. Given this information, I like to ask people, like, what feels easier or more manageable, and what do you need more of? And here's my information, just if people are interested in taking the Caregiver Survey, submitting some idea to the toolkit, and my Instagram and Facebook is right up there. My website is igrivera.com, so please check out the HEAL Project, and I look forward to hearing from some of you.
Thank you so much, Ignacio. So the question that we asked earlier when you first started around holistic sexuality information, there's been a lot of conversation in the text chat, and so I just wanted to pull out a couple of responses. So it starts off with Martina saying children are sexual beings, and so talking about sexuality empowers children and makes them less vulnerable to abuse, which I think you went on to say exactly that, right? And then Strong Oak talks about it's important for survivors to be able to reclaim their bodies on our own terms and holistically. Lots of talk around, you know, we engage children in conversation around holistic sexuality. It really removes some of that shame and allows them to be comfortable with understanding themselves and understanding, you know, boundaries and what boundaries they might have for their own bodies and sexuality. So again, we have replacing shame and guilt with sexual fulfillment, openness. You had some love around framing this as, you know, a sex positive approach. So seeing, and so I think it was Natalie said, this sex positive approach reminds me of a shift in CSA prevention that replaced good touch and bad touch with safe touch and unsafe touch to avoid messages that, you know, all sexual touches are shameful. So So there's a lot of conversation, and Ignacio, I'm sure you'll go through it and look through some of this. But I just really love the point you made and you made it several times, so it sounds like it's a really important piece to your work, is that this is really lifelong, right? And as someone mentioned, children are sexual beings, and we remain sexual beings, and that doesn't stay stagnant, right? That shifts. And so it seems like there's always more to know about our own sexuality, and then to be able to process that so we can provide that information to our youth as well.
Absolutely.
So Ignacio, before we introduce our next speaker, there was a question that I'm trying to find, and it was around so first, I guess the question is, where are you having these conversations? Is it in school-based settings? Is it in the community? Because I think, so it was Rhonda that asked the question, but I'm sure that other people have similar experiences where, they feel that this is so important. This is such a necessary component to preventing sexual abuse and child sexual abuse in particular, but they're not welcomed to come into schools and have these conversations for various reasons. And so what, do you have any thoughts around that?
Yes.
Or experience?
When I first started this project, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. When I first started this project, I thought that I wanted to tackle the school system, right, to go into the school systems and want to do this work. But I quickly realized that I wanted to work with the institution of the family because it is very difficult to get into the school systems. And when you do, it's very monitored about what you can and cannot speak about, right, unless you have a particular teacher who gets you in and you're able to do it, because I've done that in kind of quote-unquote, like, not officially, right? And so I think starting with the family is really important, because a lot of times we focus on, okay, our kids are going to learn sex at school, and we hope that they're getting all the information, but what we find is that is very, cisgender, heteronormative, and, monogamous-centric. And we need to really expand these conversations, because when we make them small, we actually create the shame. We actually create the shame, because if we don't fit into that small box, then there's nowhere else for us to go. We cannot share this information. We are scared to ask questions, right? So we do things in silence. And a lot of times people end up thinking that what happened to them they deserve because of their identity or their curiosity or their desire. And so that's what needs to shift. And I think it's working within family structures. It has to be, again, I'll say it over and over, from birth to crossing over. That has to happen in that way. That's what I strongly believe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ignacio. And there's some other comments, and so feel free if you are open to chatting with folks. But there was another comment about, the role that culture can play in talking about these issues. So, some communities, this is still very taboo. And so we know that this is happening, and this is an issue that we need to address. But when people aren't, wanting to have the conversation, that creates another barrier and obstacle.
Yes, that's why I think there has to be multiple things, right? Because we can do it, some of us can do it within our families. And then we also do need the schools and the programs, the youth programs. We need to have a multi-pronged approach to talking about this. So hopefully those other areas, other, ways to get the information. We have more books now. We have the internet, so there are more ways, but we have to definitely have a more, what are those sites that are, good sites, like Scarletine is one of them. It's one of the best sites I've ever seen about, sex education for young people. It's a beautiful site. I recommend it. So we need to have all of these things available just in case. And I'm also thinking about these different communities as well, because it's so taboo. How do we culturally shift that, right? How do we talk about it, that to say this is a life-saving tool? If we shift the way we think about sex, the way we approach it, maybe we can shift how people feel about talking about this to their kids.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ignacio. I feel like we could continue this conversation for multiple web conferences. And, you know, it's such a big topic, and one that I think, you know, people, there's lots of successes, and then there are lots of obstacles that people are finding in incorporating this work into their sexual violence prevention. And so I think that we need to continue the conversation. So thank you so much, Ignacio. I hope if we have time we can get back and hear more from you today, but feel free to pop into that text chat, and I think take a look at that.
Thank you.
So yeah, so we do have another question for you all, kind of shifting from Ignacio's work into our next presenter, but we're really looking to hear your thoughts on how you can engage adults in your communities to use the power that Ignacio talked about, right? There's so much power in being a parent, but also just being an adult in general and having relationships with children and youth. And so how can we use the power and knowledge that adults have to prevent child sexual abuse? And so go ahead and let us know your thoughts on that. And while you think about that, I want to introduce you to our next guest. And Strong Oak LeFevre has been a guest on other PreventConnect web conferences, so it's so exciting to bring Strong Oak back. And I want to give you a little bit of information about Strong Oak. There's a lot to know, but Strong Oak, I also want to make sure that you're on the phone line. So can you just let me know if you're there?
I'm
Hi,
here. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Great. I can hear you. Yep.
All right.
So I'm going to read your bio so folks can get to know a little bit more about you and your work. So Strong Oak is the executive director and co-founder of the Visioning Bear Circle Intertribal Coalition, Incorporated. Strong Oak is a co-author of the Walking in Balance with All Our Relations teaching curriculum, a violence prevention bystander approach that is based on the traditional values of indigenous people prior to colonization. The curriculum is designed to decolonize indigenous peoples and reclaim historical ways of being in the community. And the curriculum speaks of historical trauma and is meant to serve as a way of being in indigenous communities that would prevent the incidence of all forms of violence. It's also designed to be embraced by multicultural groups seeking an intersectional understanding of structural racism and how it informs the prevention of sexual and domestic violence. Strong Oak has a master's in social service administration from Case Western Reserve University School of Social Work and has served on the advisory council for the National Sexual Resource Center for 6 years. And while on the council, Strong Oak was its voting representative to the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape Board of Directors. Strong Oak is also currently a peer cohort representing Visioning Bear Circle Intertribal Coalition with the Just Beginnings Collaborative, which you've heard about from Ebb, and is really working on teaching circle process to communities, agencies, and providers, working with folks who are survivors of homicide victims, domestic and sexual violence, and really working to return to their communities violence-free after having hurt others. Most recently, Strong Oak has been appointed by the governor of the state of Massachusetts to serve on the Statutory Restorative Justice Advisory Committee for a 6-year term that just began in November. So Strong Oak, thank you so much for joining us for yet another PreventConnect web conference. I would love for you to go ahead and talk us through the work that you're doing. Every time I hear you speak about the work you do with Visioning Bear, I learned something new, so I'm so excited. You have all the control now with the slides.
Okay, the big thing about working in my community really began, it was 10 years before I could even get my community to even think about dealing with these issues when I was working in a mainstream agency. People did not want to come, and I think a lot of that had to do with the historical trauma and also the mandated reporting requirement and the damage it would do in our community. And especially since we all come from the circle process. So I kind of got weaned on circle process in my community before I was able to apply it for my work to prevent childhood sexual assault. So in a circle, everything is truly democratic. It's not the democracy we think of with a 50% vote. It's based on consensus. And so people need to talk until they arrive at a common decision making. It's also non-hierarchical in that regard, in that everyone has the same voice as everyone. It's more based on listening. And for instance, you would be listening 90% of the time and only talking 10%, because when you're in the circle, whether it is for a decision-making process, whether it is for a healing process, or a prevention approach, it still requires that you listen and not judge, that you don't interrupt, that you don't crosstalk, and that you and actually just listening that intently is truly transformative and empowering for people. And it can be a little startling at first because people are not accustomed to listening so intently that when the talking piece comes to them, they suddenly don't know what to say. So we just say, pause a minute and think, you know, about what's up in your heart now based on what you've been listening to. It doesn't take too long for people to, you know, embrace it over time. So we've used the word re-indigenizing more so because it's more inclusive. It includes other cultures. And truly our curriculum incorporates other cultures, indigenous to Africa, to, you know, South America, Central America, and Brazil, and all different ways like this. And what we have in common is an understanding about the land. And we see circle as a way of life, so more so than, you know, a particular training that you go to and then you don't do anything with it. I think I talked about these qualities. But what it tends to do is create leaders in your community, and especially among youth and adults, because of the contribution people are able to make and the collaborative nature of circle itself. And also it takes into account a very spiritual aspect of work in addition to the mental and the physical. So I put this up here, this particular slide. This is Music of Franklin. It's an after-school program in Leiden Woods in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And you can see from the photograph that it incorporates two different things. There's storytelling with the drumming, and there's also dancing that goes with that. And it's completely amazing to witness. In fact, you know, just yesterday, unless they canceled it because of the snow, young people were, you know, performing in their community around MLK Day, and the performers do perform in their whole community to the whole 500-member HUD community plus outside members of the Greenfield area. So, and they play the violin too, and it's just incredible. I think it builds resilience and skills and builds relationships between adults and children, and the skill building is also accessing different parts of the brain, you know, just to provide a resilience to being able to deal with trauma. Almost everyone involved in the program has had some form of trauma or other. And so some of the folks, the adults and the parents, how we got involved with Music of Franklin is they were looking for a program for the adults to take some responsibility around the safety of the children in the community, given the number of sexual assault disclosures that were going on, that children that were participating in the programs were sharing with the staff. So we began to get a group of people going from the housing and urban development community. It's very difficult to get in the community, but we have a natural in. And I have to say, a large part of visioning their success has come from being invited in. And this is very culturally relevant for me. One of my teachers taught me that I needed to let the ball come to me and not be going out there and trying to push my way and get things. And I have found working with the indigenous community and in HUD communities and communities of color that this is a really great way to work, is when the ball does come to you, that you do fully the work that you say you're going to do, and you deliver what you say you're going to deliver, and pretty soon more invitations come. And literally, I got found on social media by a number of tribal groups, which I'll talk about. The Walking in Balance curriculum is really important for empowering people because it gives a reference to the environmental the analysis of the structural racism and sexism that we're dealing with in this country, and connects it to the environmental movement and to the land base. Because the first thing that happened here in the United States and in other places, but I'm just going to speak from this place right now, is that European people came and they were confronted with a different culture that they had no understanding of and no means of communicating with in any kind of respectful way. And they took land that no one else had a conception of ownership. The people that lived here believed that we're owned by the land, not the other way around. And we understood that the only thing human beings bring to the equation is an appreciation for creation. That, what I just said, is so key about appreciation for creation. Think about it. All the plants and animals and winged ones would live very well without us. They could enjoy being here on the Earth Mother without ruining the environment, forever, because they can reproduce themselves, they can feed themselves, they grow the food. We don't do any of those things. All we can do is have reciprocal relationships with these things, and see them as beings deserving of appreciation and respect, and acknowledge the generosity that all the plants and animals have, and providing everything that we need to survive. And so these concepts are quite radical and go very deeply into it. For instance, compassion is about having equity among all beings, including the environment, the plants and the animals and all beings. And you cannot begin to have respectful relationships with human beings without a sense that every single person is equal. And this was critical for us in developing our curriculum, that concept of equity, because, human beings like to think, or the dominant culture likes to think that human beings are at the top of the food chain. And in fact, that is not a tenet that's held by indigenous people whatsoever. And we have a humility around that, of understanding that we're just one of an intergenerational and interdependent group of human beings, and we don't just count what's here on the earth, but also the whole cosmos. And in order to have that connection to the land and see that the land herself has been raped and strip-mined and treated with disrespect is critical to our understanding about our work. And, and this has been like such an important thing. And like when we do our, when people take the training, it takes 3 hours a session, so it's like 39 hours really by the time it's all said and done. By that time, people have totally transformed how they look at things, and there's also a built-in evaluation. 100% of respondents, because we use audio recordings, and we have evaluation consultants to show the behavior change, and we're being able to document that behavior change, and now we're challenging culturally relevantly evaluating it, and we're using process evaluation. Now, the thing about building community is when the community can actually own the curriculum, which I think is something significant that we managed to do. In owning the curriculum, people come to, once people are trained, they can come to all our curriculum development committees and also participate in all our evaluation process. These are people from the community itself. When they come, and we've had upwards of 8 or more people excited about evaluation and curriculum development, we edit the curriculum on an ongoing basis, and we include what people have said that are really wise. And in this way, we can do an oral, go back to, in modern times, have a modern version of like oral, people didn't depend upon writing. We were an oral tradition people, and it's recreated in this whole curriculum, the way we teach it. And so we found that there is a lot of, in community circles, multiculturally, there are similar issues that arise, like if you're working in a tribal community, everybody knows everyone. There's a fear of retaliation should you share anything about, what's happened to you. And, people can lose housing and lose their children. And this is a function that we see any federal housing authority involvement in the places where people live, which is the reservation and all of the HUD-run programs. There's the thing in there about the mandated reporting and the fact that if someone, even a child, gets arrested for some reason, then the family can lose their housing. So this results in people not feeling safe to talk about these issues. And the loss of children, historically, if you look at African Americans and Native Americans have had our children taken from us, sold into slavery, put into residential boarding schools, and then taught a culture that doesn't fit what's in the heart. And now that we know what goes on with, historical trauma, it lives on in your DNA, so it's not something you can just tell people to get over it. So actually, at the heart of it, what I'm saying is the whole time I worked at a mainstream agency, no one really from my community came into that agency for services. And it's because the mandated reporting requirement, they did not feel safe, the removal of children. So one of the things Visioning There did right away is we provided circles of support around families. And we involved ourselves in the triage groups that they would have with the Department of Children and Families. And we were, saying that if you remove children and put them into white foster homes, that in fact you will be contributing to their genocide. So this has been an important, effective part of the work we've done because Visioning There has had an instrumental impact on families that got involved with the system by our involvement. And actually, when I worked in a mainstream agency, there were some changes made to allow us to use our restorative justice approach. There's so much more I could say, but basically it was getting, with the adults and empowering them. And I found that we found that if we framed it in terms of children's safety, we could get the community to really come and get trained in these groups. And the promotion of children's safety is much more prevention language. And also in that hope, we were expecting that we could get some people to come in that in fact were harm doers and people who wanted to, stop doing harm. And we found that to be the case, especially working in the tribal community when we went to Washoe and we trained community leaders there. People were freely able to share times when they'd done harm and their commitment to making changes and making things safe. People in the community were able to express their experiences, historically for what it had been like to live on the reservations and experience a lot of the violence that occurs there. And also, to frame an understanding of why a certain number of people didn't even have any conception of parenting, and that's a legacy of the historical boarding school. There are many people, elders on reservations, who have themselves or relatives that were in these schools. So this healing is still ongoing. So we're framing this in, and using, safety, and the youth trained groups that we're doing, they also will, work on keeping the community safe. It's designed to keep, have an alternative to the gang life that goes on in the communities, both the tribal communities and in the HUD communities. These are pretty much most of the, like in the off-reservation area, you'll find that Native peoples are in fact living in the HUD communities. This is a slide that got developed at one of our Just Beginnings meetings, and it really kind of shows what the circle process is all about in terms of its real rootedness in community building. And in the heart of it is listening intensely and building trust. And we find that you can't, like, take a shortcut to building trust, especially in communities that have been, inundated on all levels, where children have been treated, so badly, removed from their homes, placed in horrible situations in which to grow. And then the parenting that got there, like myself, my father was, in a residential boarding school, and I have an aunt also that was in a residential boarding school. And I wasn't really parented. And when I say that, I mean I wasn't even advised or given any kind of idea about what I might do with my life. Once I left the house, it was like there was no involvement. It's like you can really see the integration of the impact of residential boarding school in that. So when I would leave my home, no one ever came to the school at any time, except for my graduation from high school, to interface with anything to do with that. And I was not advised about anything that I might do, like most parents do with children. Somehow I turned out okay, but it's because I had really good adults that I met in the school systems and some neighbors that were really helpful to me. So adult involvement in keeping children safe can make the difference between whether a child makes it or not. I give total credit to the people I was able to be with, even finding adults on weekends where I could go and stay with them. So I think, I'm not sure if I have too many slides left, but the intersectionality of everything, I wanted to put this slide up there because when we do our circles, we can embrace all the intersections, especially using a children's safety approach. And all of these things get discussed, including ideas from graduates of the groups about how to have circle in their community to address the substance abuse that's going on. And this was a really big issue that I wanted to put out. And when I worked at a mainstream agency, a lot of people were, in their hearts, they were really anti-racist in many ways, and they did their work, however, 9 to 5. And then when they went home, they were really kind of like thinking they had done it all at the office. But it's important to do your work in conjunction with all the other anti-racist and social justice and environmental justice organizations that are going on in your community, and to get known, to be seen, to add effectiveness to what you're doing. So I'm wondering what people do that are on this webinar to take your work behind, past the office hours of 9 to 5 in your work schedule. So I would be really excited to hear what you have to say about that. So I'll just leave that slide up. But I pretty, got there. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Let's see. I know that when we talked previous to this web conference, and you brought up this idea of the importance of really embodying the work that we're doing, so that it's not something that we do for 8 hours a day and then we turn that off. So I think we'd all love to hear what you all think of that. How do you take your work beyond, your work schedule if you're working in a 9 to 5 environment? And Strong Oak, I think something that you talked about, and I'd love, Tori, if we could link the past web conference that Strong Oak was on PreventConnect, if people want to get more information about visiting there. But, I think a lot of the systems that agencies and organizations that are working in this field rely upon are systems that can really do more harm for a lot of communities than good, right? And so I think that the circle process and really bringing bringing the community in to create their own solutions is such a piece that we all really need to be thinking about. You know, how just because we've done something for many years doesn't mean that it was ever right and that it was ever really helping people, right? And so I think it's so important for us to really think about that. So thank you, Strong Oak. I'd love to hopefully find time to get back to what people are saying about this question that you've posed. But I think for the sake of time, I am going to move on to Sugat Lopez. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Sugat because like Ignacio's work and Strong Oak's work, Sugat is really working in community, within a specific community to make change. And so Sugat is Lideres Campesinas Executive Director and has been with Lideres Campesinas for over 12 years and brings so much experience and knowledge about issues that affect women, but especially immigrant farm worker women. Sugat is one of the pioneers of the Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, which is the National Farm Worker Women's Alliance, and is a former board member, and has been working and committed to social work and social justice for over 2 decades. Sugat has volunteered in extracurricular activities to tutor and mentor peers in Mexico as well as in the U.S. and has volunteered at hospitals in Mexico in special programs to help illiterate English speakers learn to read and write. I want to also let you know that Sugat was the first in her family to attend higher education and obtain a bachelor's degree from California State Polytechnic University, Pomona College of Agriculture, and graduated with honors, and is also a fellow of the Women's Policy Institute, sponsored by the Women's Foundation in California. So Sugat, being from California as well, I've been lucky enough to hear a lot about what you all are doing, working in with immigrant farm worker women, but I would love if you would walk us through that work and share that with our audience.
Sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of our prior presenters, and thank you so much for the introduction. So I'd like to start by sharing a little bit about Lideres Campesinas. Lideres Campesinas is a partner with Kimber Nicoletti, housed at Purdue University, and Campesinos Sin Fronteras in Arizona. And the 3 of us are just beginning collaborative partner, and together we have been working for the past 3 years on having this valuable exchange, learning from our peers and amongst each other about preventing child sexual abuse in farm worker communities. Lideres Campesinas was born in the Coachella Valley over 30 years ago, and the organization was it's a genuine community-based, community-driven organization with all of our members, board, and staff coming directly from farm worker communities. Most of our staff were former farm worker women themselves, and some of us come from farm worker families. Lideres Campesinas is the only statewide network of farm worker women and girls. We have a membership of about 250 women and girls of various ages, and we have over double that amount in volunteers, many of whom we have recognized as our godparents because of the support and the work that they've done in our movement throughout these 30 years. Lideres is an active and proud member of numerous local, state, national, and international coalitions with whom we join with our own unique perspective in life and experiences, and through which we're able to amplify our voices, otherwise silenced by oppression. Our organization is very diverse. We have women that come from, a large percentage of women here in California are from Mexican origin. There is a great diversity of women coming from different Mexican states, including Mexican indigenous women from towns with different languages and traditions. And also many of our members are from other Latin American countries, many of whom also are indigenous women from these other areas as well. Our organization is based throughout 13 different cities or communities, rural communities, and our members are about 18 to 75 plus years of age. Many of our members have been with the organization since the very beginning, Many others are perhaps joined in the 90s and helped pioneer or to found a local chapter, and many more are also 5 years or more recent members of the organization. And for the first time, I'm very happy to share with you all that the first time in over a decade, we have a youth group organized in the Coachella Valley. The members there range from 9 to 17 years of age, and I will be showing a picture later in the presentation of that magnificent group that was just born last year. So Líderes Campesinas' mission is to strengthen the leadership of farmworker women to be agents of social, economic, and political change to ensure their human rights. The focus of the organization throughout the years has been around domestic violence, sexual harassment, wage theft, unequal pay, discrimination, pesticide exposure, several chronic health conditions. Imagine working a 10 to 12-hour shift and during harsh and oftentimes deadly working conditions. This is the case of countless farmworker women and girls in California and actually across the nation. Other situations that Líderes Campesinas has mobilized around include limited access to information, limited access to health care, limited access to public transportation, affordable housing or fresh organic food, limited access to child care, limited access to decision-making tables such as boards and commissions, where many important decisions are being made on the lives of farmworker women, girls, and their families. And so over the years, Líderes Campesinas has mobilized its community in partnership with other stakeholders and with the support of numerous volunteers around the issues that I have just shared with you all. Over the course of the years, Líderes Campesinas very early on have held private conversations amongst its members, farmworker women and girls, regarding the root cause of the various issues that were previously presented, and have identified the ones listed here: internalized oppression, racism, classism, discrimination, power dynamics, myths, taboos, retaliation, and trauma as the root causes of many of these previously identified issues. And over the years, Líderes Campesinas has integrated on its Train the Trainers 5-module curriculum a guide for our members to extend these conversations outward and to facilitate these dialogues with peers and in public, particularly with agencies and organizations that are providing or interested in providing services to farmworker women and girls and their families. The work that we do is centered around the list that you see here: leadership development, community outreach and education, direct services to peers, technical assistance, community organizing, and civic engagement. But we always start with ourselves and our families. Let me go to the next slide. Because Líderes Campesinas is so diverse, and we hold very close to our hearts where we all come from, our traditions, food, beliefs, the use of various artistic expressions has been centered and key to advancing our work, to strengthening our statewide network of farmworker women and girls, and ultimately to living our mission. And the following are just examples of these artistic expressions. So we have our theater skits. Our theater skits have been a very excellent way to engaging people, farmworker women, service providers, on a conversation that we might not be very used to having or feel very comfortable about having. It's just kind of like an excellent icebreaker, or simply to learn about workers' rights or how to better service in a culturally and linguistically appropriate way the farm worker community. So in the images here, we see some of our members performing some theater skits. Some of them are outdoors, some of them are indoors, small spaces, large spaces. Down in the picture in the middle, bottom middle, you see we were presenting at this statewide law enforcement conference. And so we were invited for about a 2-hour presentation where we engaged. Part of the conversation was through the use of a theater, and it just it's just an excellent way of engaging the audience and having a difficult conversation. The other ways that we have engaged or used theater art to advance our work is through these bandanas, aprons, sacks. Each of these are used to help open up the conversations on various issues. The bandana project, for example, on the upper left-hand side is a project Monica Ramirez helped to create this and invited us almost 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, and ever since our members have been doing it over and over, year after year. The month of April, so decorate with messages with the experiences that the women have had themselves in working in the field and perhaps being personally sexually harassed or assaulted or witnessing sexual harassment or assault in the workplace. They have not only come to display what their experiences are, but also to show what they have learned, that their rights are in this country in regards to sexual harassment. And it's been a way to not only engage peers and other interested individuals about this conversation, but also it's been a way to heal because it's just another vehicle for the women to express their voices otherwise not heard. And through these methods, we're able to reach out to a much broader audience as we have been interviewed by local, state, national, and even international media who have been interested in knowing more about our work and the issues that the women face through all these different projects. Our Morralito project is what we have going on right now between the middle of January and the middle of February. We decorate some sacks with messages around pesticide exposure because unfortunately the life of humans is very complicated and complex to just focus on one particular issue. And then the Apron project focuses on domestic violence and raising awareness during the month of October. All of these pieces are exposed publicly, as you see in these images, in places that first and foremost peers will be able to access. So it could be outside a church, a supermarket, outside at a healthcare clinic, or wherever we're able to bring these health fairs, presentations and conferences. And we display them, and it's just, we have received a lot of compliments for having these colorful and engaging tables with all these different art pieces that our members have created. Over the years also, our members have been very intentional about creating pieces of information for their peers, considering because of the differences, not everybody speaks Spanish. Their main language might be an indigenous language, or not everybody knows how to read or write. And some other people learn better through visuals. So the brochures that you see here, a couple of them on sexual harassment, 2 on domestic violence, 1 offering the direct services that we're able to provide in some of the communities, have a lot of images, photos. It does have some words and phone numbers to be able to get a hold of us, but mainly it's the images. And some of the content is also pieces of dialogue that our members have helped to craft to ensure effective communication is provided to all of the peers that we're reaching out to. These are just other examples focused on pesticides, the green brochure, and then the 2 to the left are the products of our JDC collaborative with Kimber and Purdue University and Campesinos Sin Fronteras. The one in the middle is an illustrative a novel that Líderes Campesinas helped to with the actors and some of the skits provided input in the development of this. And the one to the left is a brochure that we have developed over the 3 years to help us open up conversation with the community, with farmworker families regarding child sexual abuse. And I'll talk more about these 2 pieces in a minute, but I also wanted to share with you all that other ways of art that we have found very useful in our organizing is storytelling. And so here I show a collaborative that we have with Mi Historia. It's a nonprofit organization that has been working with our members, and we're currently working and getting ready to present our cuentos, our stories, to the public in San Francisco and the Bay Area in the month of March. If you happen to be in the area, you're all invited to that. It's going to be at a farmer's market. And so stories of our members and staff who are able to share in a very powerful way stories about immigration, their immigrant experience, their experience in working in the field, their dreams. You know, many of these women have dreams of becoming their own, having their own agriculture business. And so how do we do that? And then, you know, childcare and what's their hope for their children in terms of their education, their health, so the women are able to also reach out and mobilize through these storytelling opportunities. Going back to this tool that we have developed in partnership with Kimber and Campesinos Sin Fronteras, Líderes Campesinas has been able to not just use it as a tool to have a conversation as we're presenting it to our peers, but also to engage the community through arts again. So on the upper left-hand side, you see a couple of paper dolls, puppets holding hands. When we give that out to the public, it's just like two blank dolls holding hands. We present the story, and at some point we stop and ask people to draw. How do you think this girl is feeling up to this point of this illustrative novel? And there's a lot of, the story begins with the little girl feeling upset, feeling scared because of a situation that is happening with someone who's very close to the family. And so people tend to draw what you see there on the left-hand side as someone who's heartbroken, feels, you know, is sad, fearful, lack of trust. And then towards the story, as it progresses, the parents decide to listen to their daughter and believe, you know, what she's saying and take action, you know, to ensure her safety. And so then we ask the audience, so how do you now think or can draw here how she's now feeling? And so the tendency is like she feels some peace and trust, and she feels loved and happy and confident. And then we get these dolls and put them out publicly and engage the community on a conversation about, you know, the impact that child sexual abuse is having, you know, on children, and perhaps on many of the survivors. Many of the adults have opened up and said, you know what, I have actually, it's the first time that I'm going to share this, but as a child, I experienced abuse. I was being harassed, and I can relate to the story of this girl, and I understand the importance of the work that you're doing. And you know, they want us to go back and just continue to have these conversations with them. They're, you know, finding opportunities for our peers, or finding certain spaces, opening up these spaces for us to go and share, you know, these tools and this important conversation. So, you know, we've been invited to go to migrant parent program meetings, you know, through schools or, you know, some other group spaces, even like family gatherings. And it's been a very, very powerful tool. More on storytelling, our members are actively out, being reached out by media. And here you see some examples in the radio, or out by someone who's from a TV station who wants to interview the women on any of these topics or issues, but also on child sexual abuse and the work that we're doing. And then here we have some images of some of the girls that we have been reorganizing since last year. Here learning, they wanted, as they're tagging along the moms and then indirectly, you know, contributing to the identifying the issues that they want to focus on, you know, with the adults. They have also come up and said, you know what, we're interested in learning about healthy relationships and how does that look like. And they too have joined into the art development of these little aprons, for example. And so here we see a sample of the group gathering, you know, decorating them. And while they're doing that, they're having a conversation and learning, you know, from each other, and also they then get to publicly exhibit these. These girls from the Coachella Valley have also, wanted to not just stay, within their group, but also have asked to, hey, let's meet with those who we think are responsible for our safety as well, in the school, for example. And so here we see a photo of a gathering that happened last year in the summer with some of the girls there who just engaged in a very meaningful and powerful way with a law enforcement officer there who was listening to their concerns, but also to some of the ideas. And there was this conversation where this officer was very interested in having other of his peers, officers, joining in the meeting and have set up, meetings to meet afterwards. So like the girls are also interested in engaging themselves as being part of the solution, mobilizing, like what kind of actions or work, with law enforcement would make them feel safer, or safe when it comes to what's happening in the schools or, outside the school. So, the women and the girls are the center of the work that happens in Líderes Campesinas. And so I have, this is our contact information. We are the resource. There is also a link to a video on YouTube that shows our Women in the Coachella Valley in Action. It was collaborative with some students who helped us put that video together, and it's there for those who might be interested in learning more about our work. And if you want to get a hold of us, learn more about the work that we do, our curriculum, etc., here's our information. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sugat. There was a lot of conversation in the text chat when you were presenting around a couple different pieces. One was around the use of art that you all have really incorporated, whether it was the theater or the photonovelas. But I think that, there's such an importance when you're trying to have these difficult conversations and find solutions to find ways that are not just always having a conversation, right? But using art to really get people to tap into their own experiences and emotions, and then to be able to move to finding solutions. And then I think the other piece that was really resonating with folks was around storytelling, and that, it's such an important piece. Everyone has a story and has a history. And I love the slide that you had with the youth involved in storytelling. It was really powerful. And then the last slide with all of those girls around the law enforcement officer, just knowing that they had been able to tell their story and be heard. So I just, want to, and also the other thing that I wanted to mention that really spoke to me about your work was that it all seems so, that culture piece, right, the traditions and the food and language is such an important foundation for the work that you all have been able to do. And so that goes back to when we think about community organizing and mobilizing around prevention, it's really looking at, what are the assets that communities have that can really help them make change and find solutions to the numerous problems. And I really like to get to that you pointed out that sexual harassment and domestic violence is not the only issue facing farm worker women. And there's other physical and wage theft and other issues. And so how do we find solutions that can really impact all of those? So I realize once again that we've run out of time. We did have another question for you, so I'm just going to ask that maybe you take this with you through the rest of your day and into your evening, and that's really looking at what are some ways that you can support community organizing and mobilizing that allows people to show up as their full selves. So often people, everyone has multiple identities, and so how are we asking people to not choose which identity they're going to show up with, but to be able to show up whole and to bring those experiences and all of those wonderful assets and strengths with them. So I'd love for you all to think about that. I want to once again just thank our presenters We have some resources that are part of the slides from Strong Oak and Ignacio that you all have access to. And so these are resources that we wanted to share. We also, if you missed the prior 2 web conferences in this series with Just Beginning's collaborative folks, we'd love to point you to those because all of these conversations have been so important, and there's just such innovative and necessary work happening, and it's so great to hear from folks and to also be able to support their work. So I encourage you to take a look at that. If you need to get a hold of us, you have our information. But, you know, besides thanking Strong Oak, Sugat, Ignacio, and Ebb, and my colleague Tori and our captioning partners at Aberdeen, I really want to take a moment to thank you all in our audience for coming and listening and sharing your insights and asking your questions. And I hope that you're taking some good information and ideas from this web conference. So I think with that, we are going to end for today. Stay warm wherever you are, and I hope to see you on a future web conference. Thank you all so, so much.